Your Honor, may we approach, please?
All right, yes.
Thank you. Discussion held off the record at sidebar.
Your Honor, could we approach the bench again? Discussion held off the record at sidebar.
To the jury. Do you want in on any of this? No, you don't. Oh, I'm sorry. This is just a complicated area. I'm trying to make it work. In my other courtroom where, this is not my normal courtroom. I'm really across the hall there. And when attorneys approach, the jury sits right there, sort of like if Mr. Geragos is sort of like me and you're the jury. And when the attorneys want a sidebar, I make them come over and kneel there. So we have a lot less sidebars over in that court. Laughter.
I'm prepared to proceed.
Yes.
Mr. Geragos, I think you now have Exhibit 625. That was the exhibit we intended to hand you before the break. Did you have an opportunity to look at 625?
Yes.
Is 625 a compilation of letters and communications between you and attorney Bill Dickerman?
Well, some of these letters are mine. I don't believe, for instance, this top letter, which doesn't have a letterhead and which is not signed, I don't believe that's the letter that was sent to me.
You don't believe you've ever received that letter?
I don't believe that this is the letter he sent to me. And I don't believe that this letter, it has no letterhead and no signature on it. I don't think he sent that to me either.
All right. Now, I'm not asking you if he sent you an unsigned.
No.
Unletterheaded letter.
Right. I'm telling you I don't believe that this is the letter that he sent me, April 11th. And I'm almost positive that the March 26th letter that's on here is not the letter he sent me.
All right. You've never seen that letter before?
I have never seen.
Let me clarify my question.
Right.
Not that, hold on.
Objection. He's cutting off the witness.
Let me.
All right, ask another question.
Let me clarify my question. The front letter on there that's dated in March. What is that, March 24th?
March 26th.
March 26th. All right. The content of that letter you're not familiar with?
Well, let me just tell you why I don't, there's several things that.
Mr. Geragos, are you familiar with the content of that letter?
Objection. Cutting off the witness.
Well, I'm going to object to non-responsive answers.
I hadn't answered.
The question is, are you familiar with the content of the letter?
I don't know how to answer that. I don't.
All right, ask another question.
All right. Did you receive a communication from Mr. Dickerman at any time during the latter part of March of 2003 where he asked for Janet Arvizos' passport and the passports of her children?
I received and responded to, and my response is here, and this is my letter where I respond to his April 3rd letter where he wanted things retrieved from storage is what my memory is. So this letter that I sent on April 6th is in response to some earlier letter, and I reference an April 3rd letter.
Did you receive a letter at any time in the month of March from Mr. Dickerman asking specifically that passports belonging to the Arvizos family be returned to him?
Well, I see where as I sit here, I don't remember a letter in March. I remember a letter that I responded to in April.
All right. And that letter that you're responding to, did that, in part, inquire about the existence of passports belonging to the Arvizos family?
No. His April 3rd letter says, I wrote you and asked you to locate certain items. And that's what I did. I think I testified to Mr. Mesereau. I faxed that letter to Brad and told him, let's deal with it.
Mr. Geragos, at any time during the month of March of 2003, did you have a conversation with Mr. Dickerman wherein Mr. Dickerman asked you to return his client's passports?
I don't believe that I had a conversation with Mr. Dickerman in March.
At any time in the early part of April, say up till April 15th, did you have a conversation with Mr. Dickerman wherein the subject of the Arvizos passports was raised?
No, I believe the conversation we had was in reference to the contents of the storage unit.
Did you have any conversation with Mr. Dickerman about passports at any time in the month of April?
He might have mentioned it.
He might have mentioned it?
He might have mentioned it.
Objection.
In April, but I'd just be guessing.
Cutting off the witness.
Next question.
Do you have a recollection of any specific conversation at any time from the 24th of March through the end of April where the subject matter of that conversation was passports belonging to the Arvizos?
As I sit here, My memory is contents of the storage unit as what we kept talking about, he and I.
Did you ask anybody in your office to locate passports belonging to the Arvizos at any time in April?
Absolutely not.
At any time in May, did you ask anybody in your office to locate passports?
No.
Did you have any conversation with Mr. Dickerman about passports at any time in April or May of 2003?
I just don't remember. All I remember about the conversations was the contents of the storage units.
Did you know from Brad Miller that the Arvizo family was going to go to Brazil?
Objection. Assumes facts not in evidence. Foundation.
Overruled. You may answer.
In what time period?
In 2003.
I don't believe that I did.
Objection. Vague as to time.
Sustained.
At the time you began communications with Attorney Dickerman, did you know that the Arvizo family had intended to take a trip to Brazil, a trip that would have been sponsored by the Michael Jackson?
Objection. Foundation. Assumes facts not in evidence. Vague.
Compound question. Sustained.
Did you know at any time during the month of March or April of 2003 that the Arvizo family was going to go to Brazil?
I just don't remember. I can't tell you.
You have no recollection whatsoever of the subject of a Brazil vacation for the Arvizo family coming up?
Well, with anybody?
Yes, anybody.
Objection. Vague as to time.
Sustained.
During the month of March or April, did you have a conversation with anybody wherein the subject matter of that conversation was whether or not the Arvizo family would be going to Brazil?
I would just be guessing. I can't answer that as I sit here. If you want me to guess, I would say that the one person who would have, if I had had that discussion, it might have been Dickerman or it might have been Brad.
Were you aware at any time during March or April of 2003 that employees of Michael Jackson were assisting the Arvizos in getting visas, birth certificates and passports?
I think I became aware of that. I just don't know if it was from Brad or from Dickerman made the accusation. I just don't remember at the time. And what I subsequently learned is other material.
During the period of time that you instructed your employee, Brad Miller, to learn about who the Arvizos were associating with and talking to, did you learn that they were being escorted to places like federal buildings to get visas and passports?
I don't believe he ever told me that he followed them to a visa application office or a passport office or the federal building.
Did Brad Miller ever tell you that he was aware of that there had been an application to get visas from the Brazilian embassy on behalf of the Arvizos?
Objection. Vague as to time, relevance, and beyond the scope.
During the month of March and April.
I don't think so.
Just a minute.
Sorry.
Overruled. The objection is overruled. The answer is in.
At any time between the time you became involved with Mr. Jackson on the 7th of February until the end of April of 2003, did anybody tell you that Jackson's employees were assisting the Arvizos in getting visas to go to Brazil?
Objection. Hearsay. Foundation.
Overruled. You may answer.
I think it would be the same answer I gave you before. If it happened, it would have been either Dickerman or Brad.
Did you associate the request by Mr. Dickerman for passports belonging to the Arvizos, did you associate that with a trip to Brazil?
Objection. Vague as to time.
Sustained.
During the time you were receiving communications from Mr. Dickerman.
Still vague as to time.
Overruled.
No.
Are you telling us to the best of your recollection right now, in all of the telephone conversations you had with Mr. Dickerman, you do not recall him ever asking you specifically to have the Arvizos passports returned to him? That simply didn't come up.
No, I think what I testified to is that if passports came up, it would have been either through a conversation with Mr. Dickerman or with Mr. Miller, Brad.
Alright, do you have a specific recollection of a conversation with Mr. Dickerman wherein he asked you to return his client's passports?
Objection. Vague as to time.
Sustained.
Do you have a recollection today of any conversation that you had with Mr. Dickerman in March or April or May or June of 2003 wherein the subject matter of that conversation was his client's passports?
Objection. Vague as to time.
Overruled.
I think if you take it into June, yes, I think we talked about that.
Alright, you think that the first time that the conversation about passports came up in June?
No. But I think, as I indicated before, if I had the conversation, the first question was March or April, and I do have a vague recollection of either Dickerman or Brad bringing that subject up. In my mind, the two are associated because I would fax his letters over to Brad and tell Brad to get the item.
Between March and the end of June of 2003, did you tell Bill Dickerman that you would locate the passports that belonged to their clients?
The conversations with Dickerman were always not specific to items, at least when I was talking to him. It was as to the storage locker and the storage units.
Did you have a conversation with Bill Dickerman at any time before the end of June 2003 about the return of passports?
Once again, the return of items in the storage locker.
Mr. Geragos, passports. Did you talk about passports?
I do not believe, yes, as I testified, I think in March or April we talked about passports, and it was either Dickerman or with Brad. And I think sometime before June, we had at least 2 phone calls where I talked about getting his items, or the items for his client, over to his office.
Let's focus on passports right now, okay? We don't need to talk about anything beyond passports at this moment, all right? Did you ever tell Mr. Dickerman that you would try to locate his client's passports?
No, I told Mr. Dickerman I would try to locate the items.
Did you ever tell Mr. Dickerman that you have located the passports?
I said, I know where the items are.
Did you ever have a conversation about where the passports were?
I do not believe I ever had a conversation as to where the passports were.
Did he specifically ask you to return passports?
When?
At any time during your phone conversations with him.
During the phone conversations I believe that he mentioned passports, that's what I said, in March or April.
When he mentioned passports to you, did you immediately understand those to be passports to get the Arvizos family to Brazil?
No, I did not understand that there was any connection.
Did you understand that passports were in reference to the Arvizos family leaving this country, the United States?
I know what a passport is. I don't know what, I wasn't trying to read his mind.
Did you understand the passports to be in reference to the Arvizos family leaving this country?
That they wanted to leave? No, I didn't have that understanding.
Did you understand the passports to have something to do with Michael Jackson or his employees?
I understood that the items he wanted he felt were, or I felt, based on my conversations with Brad, were in storage.
How many telephone conversations did you have with Mr. Dickerman between the 24th of March and the end of June of 2003?
I couldn't tell you.
10?
No.
More?
Less.
5?
Maybe.
And you're telling us now that you have no recollection of a specific conversation where he specifically asked you to get the passports?
I'm telling you that when I talked to Mr. Dickerman, we always talked about getting the items from storage or him taking over the storage units. That's what the subject of the conversations were. And I'm telling you that because you seem to be concentrating on the passports, that I think sometime in March or April, he either wrote it in the letter or he mentioned the passports as being among the items.
Alright. Now, when he said, passports, did you make an effort to determine if your client or any of his representatives were in possession of Mrs. Arvizos' passports?
Objection. Vague as to time. Relevance. Beyond the scope.
Overruled. You may answer.
I took the letter and I faxed it to Brad and asked Brad to follow up on it.
Alright. Now, did Brad Miller then contact you and tell you, yes, he knew where the passports were?
No.
Did he tell you that the passports were in their storage locker?
Objection. Assumes facts not in evidence. Foundation.
Overruled. You may answer.
I don't believe that he did.
Did you learn whether or not the passports were in the storage locker?
First-hand knowledge or through hearsay?
Any source.
Well, I was told later that the passports were in the possession of Vinny, that Asaf had picked them up and Asaf had delivered them to my office.
Alright. Now, the passports were in the possession of Vinny?
I'm told that Asaf picked them up from Vinny.
And took them to your office?
And delivered them to my office.
Now, Asaf is Brad Miller's employee?
Yes.
Alright.
That was my understanding.
Alright. He's not your employee?
Well, I hired Brad. Asaf, my understanding, was working for Brad at the time.
Alright. Now, Asaf was working for Brad on behalf of Michael Jackson at that time?
Objection. Assumes facts not in evidence, misstates the testimony.
Overruled. You may answer.
Asaf was working for Brad, and I assumed that Brad was working for me.
Alright, when exactly was it that Asaf picked up the passports from Vinny?
I don't have any idea.
When did Asaf deliver the passports to Geragos and Geragos?
I don't have any idea.
Did he give them to you?
No.
Did he book them into some safe in your office?
They were put into an evidence locker style that has a locking device on it.
Does Asaf have a key to that evidence locker?
No.
So it had to go through somebody in your office?
Yes.
Was that you?
No.
Alright, who was it?
I don't know.
Did you make an effort to determine who that was?
I did.
And who was it?
I still don't know. It was either the receptionist or one of the assistants.
The receptionist has a key to your evidence locker?
The receptionist has access to that locker to put items into it, yes.
When did you find out that Mrs. Arvizos' passports were in your evidence locker?
When I got a substitution of attorney from Mr. Mesereau, and I itemized all of the items that were in there, I located the passports. I determined at that point that, did a little legal research, realized that they would possibly be evidence in this case, did not want to give them to Mr. Mesereau because I thought that would make him a witness, and I filed them with the court.
Mr. Geragos, you represented Michael Jackson for what, 16 months?
Yes.
And you didn't know during that entire time that you had possession of Mrs. Arvizos' passports?
That's correct.
And you made no effort to determine whether you had those passports during the time of your conversations with Mr. Dickerman?
Mr. Zonen, I don't believe that I had them at the time of my conversations with Mr. Dickerman, because Mr. Dickerman would write me letters, I would fax the letters over, and I was relying on the items getting from the storage unit over to Mr. Dickerman's office.
May I take possession of Exhibit 625?
Yes.
Now, at the time that you discovered the passports in your storage facility, were you surprised to see them?
Objection. Relevance. Argumentative.
Sustained.
Do you have a system in your law office where you're supposed to be told what exhibits are being booked into your exhibit room?
Objection. Relevance. Argumentative.
Overruled. You may answer.
There's a log that is supposed to be kept.
Did you check with the log to find out when the passports came in?
I did, and there was no notation for them. They apparently were in a manila envelope, and it may be the same manila envelope that I filed with the court.
Did you make an inquiry of the employees of your law office to find out who it was who received it?
I did. I couldn't find anybody who had checked it in, and I made an inquiry with Brad, who told me about Asaf having picked them up and then delivered them.
Did Brad Miller find out who Asaf gave the passports to?
Objection. Calls for speculation. Relevance.
Sustained.
Based on any conversation you had with Brad Miller about the movement of those passports, did you then consult with anybody in your office about whether or not they had, in fact, received those passports?
Objection. Asked and answered. Relevance.
Overruled. You may answer.
Yes, I asked virtually everybody who was there, if not everybody who was there, who had received them. Nobody had knowledge of them, and I couldn't get to the bottom of how they got in there. I assumed that because they were in the manila envelope, somebody had placed them in there because they were told that it related to Mr. Jackson's case.
When you found those passports, did you look at them?
Yes.
Now, you recognized those passports as being passports that did not belong to you, is that right?
I recognized them as passports that were not mine, absolutely.
And your understanding is that passports are the possession of the person to whom they're issued.
Well, rather than give them to.
Was that a yes or no?
I don't know how to answer that. I recognized that the court would want them, or that they should be in possession of the court, and I delivered them to the court.
It did not occur to you that those passports belonged to Janet Arvizo and her children?
I was not in this case, as the lawyer for this case, going to take items which I thought had evidentiary value and send them back to the Arvizos. My ethical obligation was to file them with the court.
Did you immediately file them with the court, that day?
No, I believe I researched it, and I consulted with several other lawyers, and did it within a relatively short period of time.
How long is a relatively short period of time?
I couldn't tell you. I know that I did it. It was a concern.
Did you have attorney Benjamin Braffman write a letter to the court?
I talked to Benjamin Braffman about it. He's one of the lawyers I consulted with.
Did you ask him to write a letter to the court?
I don't know. I know that I had a lawyer. What I did do is I directed a lawyer from my office to file them with the court.
Did you contact Bill Dickerman and tell him you've located the passports?
No.
Why not?
Well, Bill Dickerman, as I understand it, was on the witness list at that point, and I didn't feel that that was appropriate.
So you gave consideration to contacting Bill Dickerman?
I had given consideration to a number of alternatives, in discussions with lawyers about it.
Do you know where all of the communications are between you and Bill Dickerman?
No.
If I could approach, Your Honor.
Yes.
Showing you again exhibit number 625, and this time a letter on April 8 of 2003. Do you recognize this letter?
This may be one of the letters that he sent me.
If you could go to paragraph 3, please. Read that out loud, if you would, please.
Regardless of when the apartment items are returned, please deliver to my office the passports, visas, birth certificates and all other documents belonging to my clients immediately. They were last, to my client's knowledge, in Vinny's possession.
Immediately is underlined. Is that right?
That's correct.
Do you understand underlining to mean?
Emphasis.
Emphasis. Alright. Now, when you received this presumably on or about the 8th of April, did you then make an effort to look for those passports?
I don't believe that the passports were in my possession on the 8th of April.
Did you contact Vinny to find out if, in fact, Vinny had those passports?
No. What I said before is, I took the letter, I faxed it to Mr. Miller, and I asked Mr. Miller to take action.
Alright. Did you follow up with Mr. Miller soon after the 8th of April to find out if, in fact, he had located the passports?
I just asked him about the items. I wanted all items delivered to Mr. Dickerman's office.
You acknowledge now receipt of the April 8th letter, is that correct?
When you say, acknowledge receipt, it looks like one of the letters he sent me. I don't, frankly, as I sit here, I don't know if all of those letters are the same letters that Mr. Dickerman sent me, because there's a number of them that don't have letterhead, nor are they signed.
Now, this particular letter does actually have a letterhead. Law Offices of Dickerman and Associates, April 8th, the one you acknowledge receiving?
No, I didn't acknowledge receiving it. I said it looks like a letter he would have sent me. But I can tell you as I sit here, the more I think about it, that I don't believe he sent me this March 26th letter. I think he may have sent me a letter in March, but it wasn't this letter. And I think that's why there's no letterhead on it, and I think that's why there's no signature on it. I wouldn't trust anything Mr. Dickerman tells me.
Let's move on to the letter that you said looks more familiar, alright? The April 8th one. And I believe you said that it does look familiar. You think you've read that, is that correct?
No, I'm telling you it looks familiar because it's got a letterhead, it's addressed to me, it's purportedly signed by him. I am not going to sit here, unless you want me to go back and review it, but I wouldn't attest to anything that Bill Dickerman has produced is the accurate item.
April 9th, take a look at this letter, please. That has a letterhead and a signature, is that correct?
It does.
Alright, the content of that letter refers to passports, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
Visas and birth certificates?
Yes.
Do you have a recollection of reading this letter?
I don't have a recollection of reading that letter.
Do you know where your communications are between you and Mr. Dickerman?
I do not as I sit here. I don't know if I still have them in the office or not.
You could very well have these in your office?
I don't know if I do.
Did you turn over your file to the current defense team, Mr. Mesereau and Mr. Sanger and Miss Yu?
I believe that I've turned over my entire file.
Would that have included the letters from Mr. Dickerman?
Should have.
You acknowledge that the one dated April 9th also contains a reference to birth certificates, visas and passports?
The one that he's provided you does. I would also tell you that the April 11th letter, which has no letterhead, no signature on it, I don't believe I ever received, the following one. I will tell you that if I have a letter, that I generally referenced in my letter the one that he would send me. And I would do it there. I would say, thank you for your letter dated May 12th. Or I would say, thank you for your letter.
Let's turn to the
Objection. He's cutting off the witness.
Sustained.
Could I ask the court to allow the witness to complete his answer?
You do have a letter here.
Just a moment, counsel. We're having a conversation over here.
Did you want me to be part of that?
It would help. Mr. Mesereau requested the witness be allowed to finish the answer. I agree. He probably doesn't remember where he was at this point. Do you have anything to add to your answer?
All I was going to say is that if I reference a letter, I would assume that I got. That would normally be how I would start it. I would start my letter back to him referencing or thanking him for his letter of that particular date. That does not, however, mean that the letter that he's produced that I necessarily think is the one that I got. And I would just show you here's the March 26th letter. This is the one that has no letterhead and is not signed. The first letter that he apparently has put in this package, I say, thank you for your letter of April 3rd. Please give me a call. I don't mention the March letter, which leads me to believe I didn't get it. I do the same thing with the others. And I don't believe he sent this letter to me.
A letter from you to Mr. Dickerman, a one-sentence letter.
Yes.
It says, we have retrieved various items from storage and would appreciate your advising us as to where they should be delivered.
Yes.
The date is the 15th of April.
Right.
Does that reference any letters from Mr. Dickerman?
I believe that was when we started to talk about, in the phone conversations with him, of having them delivered to a location. And at some subsequent point we actually tried to deliver the items to his office directly.
Did you arrange to have all of the possessions that were placed in storage that belonged to the Arvizos family delivered to Mr. Dickerman's office?
I told Brad to deliver them to the office and give him everything that they had.
Did you tell him to do that knowing that he had no way of accommodating an apartment full of possessions at his office?
Did I do it knowing that he couldn't accommodate them?
Yes.
I thought he could accommodate it, and I thought it was a law office, and I thought if he wanted them immediately, I was going to give him them immediately, because he would not go and take the storage locker or deal with the storage locker.
Did you get Mr. Dickerman's Mr. Dickerman's permission to deliver the entire content of the Arvizos family's apartment to his office in advance of your doing so?
No. What happened is when they took.
That's a yes or no, Mr. Geragos. Did you or did you not get his permission?
No.
Alright. Did you arrange to have it delivered to his office on a day that you knew he would not be there because it was a religious holiday for him?
No, I have no idea what religion he is.
Did you know that there was a message on his voicemail indicating that he would not be in his office because of a religious holiday on the date that those possessions were delivered to him?
No, I did not know that there was a message on his voicemail. And in any event, the landlord apparently would not accept the items, so they didn't get delivered.
Did you instruct Mr. Miller to deliver all of the items to Mr. Dickerman?
Yes.
Did you tell Mr. Dickerman where the items were being stored, the location?
Either I did or Brad would have.
When?
I don't know.
Do you know why that they were stored under Brad Miller's name?
As opposed to whose?
Janet Arvizos. They're her possessions, weren't they?
She would have had to have paid for it, and she claimed she had no money, is what my understanding was from Brad.
And why exactly was Brad Miller willing to assume the cost of paying for the storage of her possessions for months? Why was he willing to do that?
I don't know. You'd have to ask him that. I don't think he wanted to.
Why were you willing to do that? You were paying that bill, weren't you?
I don't believe I was paying that bill, and I don't believe that he wanted to do that. I think he wanted them, and I told Mr. Dickerman that I wanted him to take that over so Brad did not have to continue doing that.
Mr. Geragos, were you responsible for vouchers being submitted to you by Brad Miller for expenses that he incurred in this investigation?
Vouchers?
How did you bill? How did he bill you? How did you pay him?
Objection. Relevance.
Overruled. You may answer.
He would send me a bill and I would pay it.
Did you keep copies of those bills?
Probably not.
Did you review them to see what he was doing?
Well, I would have looked at it for the amount, and then would have authorized payment, if we paid it directly. I don't know, as I sit here, whether I paid all of his bills or whether he submitted them to Mr. Jackson's accountant. I couldn't tell you as I sit here.
When did Mr. Jackson stop being responsible for the storage of Miss Arvizos' property?
Objection. Assumes facts not in evidence. Foundation.
Sustained.
When did you stop being responsible for the storage fees of Mrs. Arvizos' property?
Objection. Assumes facts not in evidence.
Overruled.
Alright, I don't know that I guess ultimately I'm responsible because Brad was working for me, but I don't think that I was trying to keep those items. In fact, I was trying to get those items to Dickerman.
During the 4 or 5 months that Miss Arvizos' possessions were in a locker under the name of Brad Miller, who was paying that bill, the storage fees?
I assume Brad was.
Would he then bill you?
He would either bill me or he would have billed Mr. Jackson's accountant.
Would there be a specific designation for that bill as Arvizo Family Storage?
I don't know if there would or not, or whether it would have just been some kind of a listing of expenses.
Do you know where those bills are today?
I do not.
Did you order a surveillance be conducted upon Hamid Moslehi?
I think that I did tell Brad to find out what he was doing with the videotape when he wouldn't return it.
Did you specifically tell Brad Miller to follow Hamid Moslehi?
I wanted to know what he was doing with the videotape.
Did you ask him to film Hamid Moslehi?
Probably not.
Did you believe that Hamid Moslehi was also going to shake down Michael Jackson?
I wanted to know why, when I was promised that we were going to get a copy of the videotape, why we didn't get it.
Did you know a man by the name of Johnny? It's not there. I've got it up here. Where is it? The one that's in evidence. It's in there. I'm like that on Fridays.
I understand.
Did you know a person named Johnny Mehiedich?
When?
Easy for me to say, huh? Mejietich, Mehiedich.
Not in 2003.
Alright, you later learned who that was. Is that right?
That's right.
And when you learned who that was, you learned that he was some kind of an investigator working for Brad Miller.
I learned that later.
You learned that he was not a licensed investigator, is that right?
I will accept your representation, but, no, I didn't know that.
Did you ever meet Johnny personally?
I don't believe I have.
Did you know at the time that he was working for Brad Miller? And when I say, at the time, I mean on the assignment to follow and investigate the Arvizo family.
No, not him specifically.
Did you know that he contacted the Arvizo family at the home of Janet Arvizo's parents in El Monte?
No.
Did you know that he was throwing stones at their house?
Objection. Misstates the evidence. Assumes facts not in evidence. Foundation.
That's Maria Ventura's testimony, Your Honor.
That's not what she said.
And Develin Arvizo's testimony.
The objection is overruled. You may answer.
No, I don't know, and I would find that hard to believe.
You would not have approved of such behavior on behalf of an agent working on your behalf, is that right?
Right. I don't send people out to throw stones at people's houses.
Did you ever meet Mr. Mehiedich personally?
I think I said I don't believe that I have.
Did you ever see him?
I don't believe that I've ever met him, so I don't believe I've ever seen him.
Can't hear you, sir.
I don't believe I've either met or seen him.
When the hands go flying out there, it means they can't hear.
I thought it was bathroom break. Laughter.
Exhibit number 277. Would you take a look at that note, both front and back?
Mr. Zonen, you've been taking a lot of liberty at the witness stand.
Liberty. What, sir?
At the witness stand.
I will move away immediately. Do you recognize that exhibit?
No.
Is that, in fact, what appears to be a note?
Yes. It looks like a piece of paper that's torn out of a spiral notebook of some kind.
Excuse me. Can I see what the exhibit looks like?
Yes.
May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
Thank you.
We learn never to open those binders. They go everywhere once we do that. You said you don't recognize that note, is that right?
I do not.
During the course of your representation of Mr. Jackson, you never saw that exhibit?
Objection. Vague as to time.
At any time.
Beyond the scope.
Sustained.
Did anybody tell you that Mr. Mehiedich, on behalf of Brad Miller, went to the home of Janet Arvizo's parents in El Monte?
I think I read a report, one of the sheriff's reports that mentioned that.
If you were to learn that that note was left by Mr. Mehiedich at the Ventura family residence in El Monte, would that be consistent with your instructions to Brad Miller?
Objection. Calls for speculation. Foundation.
Overruled. You may answer.
I don't know how to answer that, because I don't know why it would have been left.
Do you know why an employee of yours was requesting Gavin or Star contact Vinny or Frank?
I don't know. It doesn't say Gavin or Star on it.
Turn it over.
Is that what it says? It looks like to stat, or I guess that could be Gavin. I don't know.
Do you know why an employee of yours would be directing a 13-year-old boy and a 12-year-old boy to call Vinny or Frank?
I don't know why the note was left. Like I said, I've never seen the note.
Alright, now, after the 13th of March, would you have?
Of 2003?
Would you have any reason?
Of 2003?
Of 2003. Would you have any reason to direct an employee of yours to have these children contact employees of Michael Jackson?
Objection. Calls for speculation. Foundation. Relevance. Beyond the scope.
Overruled. You may answer.
I don't know why the note was left.
Do you know if Brad Miller was working with Frank or Vinny during the early to middle part of March?
When you say, working with, I believe he was talking to them.
Alright, was he receiving instructions from them?
I don't think he was receiving instruction from them.
Did you give any direction to Brad Miller to take instruction from either Frank or Vinny?
No, I don't think that he was taking. I don't know, but I don't think he was taking instruction from them.
Did you know that in the early part of March of 2003, there was an effort by some employees of Michael Jackson to have the Arvizos family go to Brazil?
Objection. Assumes facts not in evidence. Foundation.
Overruled. You may answer.
In March or February of 2003, I don't believe so. I think is that a different question than what you had asked me before?
No.
Before the break? I don't believe so. I think, as I indicated before, if I had that conversation, it would have been with either Dickerman or Brad.
During February or March of 2003, did you have a conversation with Mark Schaffel about the Arvizos family going to Brazil?
I don't believe so.
Were you aware, during the month of March of 2003, whether or not employees of Michael Jackson checked the Arvizos sons out of John Burroughs Middle School?
No, I'm not aware that happened.
When did you learn that happened?
Objection. Foundation. Assumes facts not in evidence. Relevance. Beyond the scope. Vague as to time.
Leading to?
Leading to.
The objections are overruled.
Mine too?
I don't know that I've ever learned that.
Was there ever a conversation with Brad Miller about the children going to John Burroughs Middle School?
Objection. Vague as to time. Relevance. Beyond the scope.
Overruled. You may answer.
I don't remember. I mean, they may have attended there. Maybe. I don't know.
Were you aware that Johnny Mahiatich was seen filming the Arvizos children at John Burroughs Middle School?
No.
Objection. Vague as to time.
Overruled. The answer was no. Next question.
Did Brad Miller ever talk to you about conducting a surveillance of the children at John Burroughs Middle School?
No, not that I'm aware of. I don't know that I talked specific locations. Like I said, I told him to find out where they were, what they were doing, who they were meeting with. And the middle school doesn't ring a bell. It's not to say he might not have said they're attending school or might not have told me at some point that they were attending school or he saw them attending school. I just don't remember John Burroughs Middle School.
Do you know why the children were checked out of John Burroughs Middle School by Vinny?
I don't know that happened.
Well, let's assume, hypothetically, in early March 2003, Vinny Amen, then an employee of Michael Jackson, checked out these two boys from John Burroughs Middle School.
I don't know why he would have done that.
Did anybody have any conversation with you about Michael Jackson's employees being involved with these two boys being taken out of that school?
Objection. Vague as to time. Assumes facts not in evidence. Relevance. Beyond the scope.
Overruled. You may answer.
Discussions with Vinny? Is that what you're asking? Or with anybody?
Could the question be read back?
Yes.
Did anybody have any conversation with you about Michael Jackson's employees being involved with these two boys being taken out of that school?
I don't believe so, no.
Now, during this period of time, of February and March of 2003, you were representing Michael Jackson?
Yes.
And your concern, of course, dealt with the Arvizos family?
Objection. Vague. Argumentative. Foundation.
Overruled.
Is that correct?
That was one of my concerns, yes.
Alright, I assume one of the other concerns you had is whether or not the statements Michael Jackson made in the Living with Michael Jackson documentary were true?
Objection. Vague as to time. Relevance.
Overruled. You may answer.
Which statements?
About sleeping with boys.
Whether they were true.
Yes.
We went through this before. I told you before. The suggestion that the sleeping with boys was sexual, if that's what you're suggesting, no, I did not believe that that was true.
Mr. Geragos, the question was whether or not any boys occupied the same bed with Michael Jackson at the same time.
That wasn't the question.
All right.
You asked me about sleeping with them and now you're asking me whether they're sleeping in the same bed.
All right.
Okay, so I don't know what statements you're talking about. Be specific.
Did you make any inquiry with Michael Jackson during the months of February and March about whether or not he shared a bed with a child other than his own?
Objection. Relevance. Foundation.
Overruled. You may answer.
Michael Jackson, in the discussion I had with him and my observation of him with the kids, I did not.
I'll object as exceeding the scope of the question.
Objection. He's cutting off the witness.
We're going to have to resolve that, too.
The objection is sustained. He's not cutting off the witness. He's not answering the question. Read the question back.
Did you make any inquiry with Michael Jackson during the months of February and March about whether or not he shared a bed with a child other than his own?
Yes.
Did you ask him if it was true that he shared a bed with a child other than his own?
No, I did not ask that question.
During February and March of 2003, during the period of time that you had directed Brad Miller to take account of who the Arvizos family were associating with, did you consult with any employees of Michael Jackson to determine what they were doing with the Arvizos family?
Yes, I think that I talked to a number of people.
Did you talk with Mark Schaffel?
I believe that I talked a number of times with Mark Schaffel. I talked with, I believe, Joe Marcus. And I had other lawyers in the office talk with people at the ranch as well.
Did you have conversations with Mark Schaffel specifically about the Arvizos family?
I think that I've talked with Schaffel about the Arvizos family.
Did Mark Schaffel tell you that they were making arrangements to move the Arvizos family to Brazil?
I just don't remember if he told me, if he ever told me that. I think that normally when I talk to Schaffel about the Arvizos, my memory of it is in regards to the video and this rebuttal tape, as they called it.
Mr. Geragos, with regards to conversations with Mark Schaffel, are you telling us it's possible you had a conversation with him about moving the Arvizos family to Brazil?
No, I don't think that he ever told me that he was moving the Arvizos family to Brazil. I just don't have any recollection of that.
Do you have a recollection of any conversation with Mark Schaffel wherein the subject of Brazil came up?
You know, I think that Schaffel, during that period of time, told me that he had gone to Brazil.
All right. Did you have a conversation with Mark Schaffel at any time in February, March of 2003, where Mark Schaffel mentioned Brazil in the context of the Arvizos family?
I don't believe so. I believe that when he talked about Brazil, it was because he had gone to Brazil or was going to Brazil or something to that effect.
Did you have any conversations with Frank Cassio during the month of February and March?
Yes.
Did you have numerous conversations with Frank Cassio during the months of February and March of 2003?
I would say more than 5.
Could it have been more than 25?
It could, well, I wouldn't say 25. But I would say more than 5.
Do you have a recollection as to whether any of those conversations included a discussion of Brazil?
I don't know if the conversations took place after I would have talked to Brad or Dickerman. I just don't know. I can't put it in context. But I don't, as I sit here, I don't remember, but that doesn't mean I didn't.
Do you have a recollection of any specific conversation you had with Frank Cassio regarding the Arvizos in Brazil?
I don't have any specific recollection as I sit here.
Do you have a recollection of anything Frank Cassio may have said to you about the Arvizos family going to Brazil?
No, I still think that probably would have been with Brad or with Dickerman.
Did you have any conversations with either Dieter Weisner or Ronald Konitzer during March or February of 2003?
I think, as I testified last week, that in February and March of 2003, I had very limited contact with Dieter. And I talked with Ronald. And I don't think I talked to Ronald about any of those things. Ronald's discussions with me generally wouldn't have been about things like that.
Do you have a recollection at all during the months of February and March of 2003 of thinking to yourself that Michael Jackson or his employees ought not be involved in moving the Arvizos family to Brazil?
Objection. Argumentative. Foundation.
The objection is overruled.
Of thinking to myself?
Yes.
I don't know.
Did you have a conversation with anybody at all during the months of February or March of 2003 where the subject of that conversation was the fact that Michael Jackson's employees ought not be involved in moving Janet Arvizo and her children to Brazil?
If I would have had that conversation, like I said, it would have been with Dickerman and/or Brad.
All right, and you're saying you would have, but you have no independent recollection of it?
I don't remember what the conversation was or who brought up Brazil. I know that there was discussions, and I just don't remember if it was Dickerman or Brad.
Were any bills paid for passports or visas or birth certificates that were paid for by you?
No.
Were there any bills paid for by you that involved moving the Arvizo family from their apartment or their rents?
Not that I'm aware of.
Only the storage unit, then, was paid by your office?
If he submitted it with an expense bill, but I don't believe that he did. I would have to take a look at the bills.
Mr. Geragos, I asked you a question early on about the DCFS taped interview, the tape of that interview. And you answered that you thought it may have come from Mr. Snedden.
The tape would have been turned over as a copy after the search warrant was executed.
All right, Mr. Geragos, you know that that tape was not in our possession until just prior to the trial?
I didn't.
Objection. Argumentative. Assumes facts not in evidence.
Sustained.
Mr. Geragos, when you say the tape was received, do you mean in discovery?
I believe that, yes, in discovery, the tape was received.
All right, you think that that tape was then seized from Michael Jackson's residence?
No.
Objection.
I think.
Objection. Foundation.
Well, then we need to resume this at sidebar, based on the earlier conversation as to how to resolve this.
Do you have any other questions you want to ask?
Perhaps, if I could have just a moment, yeah. May I have just a moment, please? Discussion held off the record at counsel table. Mr. Geragos, did you at any time have a conversation with your client, Michael Jackson, during the months of February or March where the subject of Brazil came up?
No.
He never told you he was going to go to Brazil?
No.
Did he ever talk to you about the Arvizo family?
Going to Brazil? Absolutely not.
Were you aware that employees of yours were standing guard outside the country suites in Calabasas?
Objection. Argumentative. Assumes facts not in evidence.
Overruled. You may answer.
I don't believe any employees of mine were standing guard outside of the country suites. I don't buy that for a second.
Are you aware that Johnny was there at the country suites at the time that the Arvizo family was staying there?
If he was there, I don't believe he was standing guard.
Do you know what he was doing there?
I don't, but I don't believe that he would be standing guard.
Did Brad Miller ever talk to you about his involvement with the Arvizo family at the Calabasas? At the country suites and inn in Calabasas?
At the time in February or March, no.
All right. Did he tell you that he was surveilling them while they were at the country inn and suites in Calabasas?
I don't believe that he was.
Did he tell you that he was doing that?
I don't believe that he did, no.
Did he tell you that he was conducting any kind of surveillance of the family between the days of the 25th of February and the 2nd of March?
I think that he was, yes.
All right. Now, that, of course, was during the period of time that you had directed him to do an investigation of the Arvizo family, is that right?
I wanted to know where they were and what they were doing.
And that direction included finding out where they were and what they were doing, right?
Exactly.
Did word get back to you from Mr. Miller that for that 5-day period they were at a hotel in Calabasas?
Objection. Vague as to relevance.
The 28th of February, the 25th of February to the 2nd of March, 2003.
The objection is overruled.
I don't remember if he did. It wouldn't surprise me if he did, but I don't remember.
Did he tell you what they were doing there?
Like I say, I don't remember if he did.
Did you learn from him if they were there with Vinny and/or Frank?
Objection. Vague as to time. Relevance. Beyond the scope.
Overruled.
As I indicated, I don't have an independent memory of what he would have told me back then as to the country suites.
Was Brad Miller working directly with Vinny and Frank to determine the whereabouts and location and movement of the Arvizo family?
I don't believe that he was, no.
Did you instruct employees of Michael Jackson to cooperate with Brad Miller so that he could do his investigation of the Arvizo family?
I instructed Brad Miller to talk to people.
Did you tell him to specifically talk to Vinny and Frank about where the Arvizos were going and from where they were coming?
I would tell him to talk to Vinny and Frank, absolutely.
So it would be reasonable to assume that Brad Miller knew where they were during this period of time if they were in the company of either Frank or Vinny.
I think that's reasonable.
Alright, did you ever learn that they were at the Country Inn and Suites in Calabasas during that period of time?
Did I learn it in February or March?
Yes.
I don't think that I did. But like I say, he may have told me.
If, in fact, Johnny was there at that time, he would have been there at Brad Miller's direction. Is that true?
As I sit here today, yes.
Did you know something back then different from that?
I didn't, as I explained to you, I didn't know Johnny was working for him at the time. I know.
When did you first learn the expression?
Objection. He cut off the witness.
Sustained. You may complete your answer.
It's okay.
When did you first hear the statement, crack whore, in connection with Janet Arvizo?
Objection. Assumes facts not in evidence. Foundation. Argumentative.
Sustained. Foundation.
Did you ever have a conversation with Mark Schaffel about Janet Arvizo where the term, crack whore, came into the conversation?
Objection. Foundation. Argumentative.
Overruled.
I don't believe so.
Did you have a conversation with Brad Miller about the content of the telephone calls that he had been monitoring between Frank and Janet Arvizo?
Objection. Foundation. Assumes facts not in evidence.
I'm sorry?
Foundation. Sustained.
Did you learn from Brad Miller that Janet Arvizo and Frank Cascio had been having telephone calls during the month of February while she was away from Neverland Ranch?
Did I learn that in February or March, in March of 2003?
Yes.
I believe that I knew that they had called, that they had talked to each other on the phone, yes.
Alright, did Brad Miller tell you about the content of those telephone conversations?
He might have. I don't have any memory of it.
Did he tell you specifically that Janet Arvizo told Frank Cascio that she could not be bought and that she would not sell a story to any of the media or the tabloids?
No.
He never said that to you?
No.
Did he tell you about the content of any of those telephone calls that she had with Frank?
Yeah, and that, one of the things that sticks out in my mind is that she was complaining about what she called, the Germans.
Alright, she was scared of the Germans?
She wasn't scared. She didn't indicate she was scared. But she was complaining about them, that they were limiting her.
Now, you never listened to those phone conversations, right?
Which phone conversations? The ones between Frank and Janet?
Janet, yes.
Objection. Vague as to time. Relevance. Beyond the scope.
Overruled. You may answer.
Did you ever listen to those?
In February or March of 2003, no.
Alright, when did you finally listen to that telephone conversation or conversations?
Objection. Relevance. Beyond the scope.
Overruled.
Sometime after February or March of 2003.
Alright, and in fact, she said that she was scared and upset about the Germans, right?
Objection. Hearsay. Assumes facts. Foundation.
It's vague. The question is vague.
When did you listen to the tape recording of the phone conversation between Janet and Frank?
Objection. Relevance. Beyond the scope. Vague as to time.
That's what I asked, was when.
The objection is overruled. He did answer that. He said, sometime after, and he gave a period of time.
I would like to know when that was, please.
I don't know the exact date. It would have been sometime well after.
Alright, prior to.
It would have been after the time of the search warrant on Mr. Miller's office.
Alright, and when you listened to it, you heard what she had said, is that correct?
That's right.
Alright, and did you listen to that tape in the company of Brad Miller?
Objection. Beyond the scope. Relevance. Vague as to time.
Overruled. You may answer.
Did you listen to it in the company of Brad Miller?
I don't think so.
After you listened to it, did you call Brad Miller?
Objection. Foundation. Relevance.
Overruled.
Overruled?
You may answer.
Yeah, probably did, yes.
You probably listened to it in the company of Brad Miller?
No, I listened to it and then probably called him afterwards, yes.
Did you ask him why it was that he had a tape recording of a conversation that was clearly a telephone conversation?
Yes,
Objection. Relevance. Foundation. Vague as to time, and argumentative.
Overruled. The objection is.
Yes, I did.
What did he tell you?
He told me.
Objection. Hearsay.
A declaration against penal interest.
Overruled.
Go ahead. What did he tell you?
He told me that Frank had expected that there was going to be some kind of an admission or crime that Janet was going to propose on the telephone call, and that's why he taped it.
Now, you understand that that should be monitored by law enforcement, right?
That's one of the exceptions, yes.
Can you tell us what penal code section says that a private citizen can decide on their own to tape record a conversation because they think there's going to be a crime?
If you give me the penal code at the break, I'll be happy to point it out to you, and I'll give you the case as well.
Did you give Brad Miller instruction to do that, to tape record telephone conversations between Frank and Janet?
No, I did not.
In fact, what you listened to didn't evidence any crime whatsoever, did it?
I did not hear any crime on that phone call.
She did not ask Frank for money at all, did she?
That's correct.
She did not tell Frank that she was going to take her story to the press, right?
That's correct.
And that wouldn't have been a crime either, would it have?
It would not have been.
The only crime that you anticipated would be her telling Frank, "I would like some money or I'm going to make a false claim against your client, Michael Jackson."
When you say I anticipated, I told you I didn't listen to it until after it was seized out of Mr. Miller's office.
Did Mr. Miller make the decision on his own to tape record that conversation?
That's what he told me.
So he didn't consult with you in advance?
He did not.
Did he tell you that that was a compilation of a number of different phone calls?
He did not.
Did you hear breaks in that recording?
I didn't notice any breaks in that recording. The only breaks that I noticed were in the ones that we talked about last week, the one that I think was on February 16th.
Did you ask Brad Miller if he made multiple tape recordings of conversations?
I asked if there were any others.
What did he tell you?
That there were not.
Did you ask him if he altered that tape in any way?
I didn't ask him that. I asked him specifically as to the February 16th tape.
Did he tell you that that tape was an accurate recording of a single conversation?
He said that they had sat down in the location of the apartment and had recorded it all at one sitting.
Did he tell you who was present at the time of that recording?
I believe that he did. I believe he told me that it was the family, and I think at one point the boyfriend was there as well.
Did he tell you that there was nothing said in the course of that conversation that would cause you concern about Janet Arvizos?
I'm sorry, what?
Did he tell you that there was nothing said in the course of that conversation that would cause you concern about Janet Arvizos?
No, on the contrary. He told me that he thought that they were telling the truth and that Michael Jackson hadn't done anything.
I'm sorry?
To the kids.
Did Brad Miller tell you that, in the course of the telephone conversation he monitored, that there was nothing Janet Arvizos said that would cause him concern about her taking any kind of legal action against Michael Jackson?
We're talking about the Frank and Janet, not the other.
The telephone conversation.
Okay, there's two tapes. One tape is February 16th with the family. The other tape that you found in the office was a tape recording of Frank's call to Janet.
Mr. Geragos, I'm asking about the telephone conversations that were surreptitiously taped.
Frank's call to Janet.
Yeah, because Brad Miller thought she was going to shake him down for money, right?
That's correct.
That phone call was placed to Janet Arvizos, correct?
That's correct.
Now, why exactly was Brad Miller placing a telephone call to Janet Arvizos wherein he anticipated she would then hit him up for money?
I don't know why he was. Why? I don't think Brad placed the phone call. I think that Frank placed the phone call. It sounds like it's his voice.
Well, but they're in the same room, right?
I don't believe that they were. I think that was a three-way call.
Well, all right. But somebody set that up, right?
I don't know. You'd have to ask him. I believe that Frank said he was going to call her. Brad told me that he was going to tape it. I don't think that they did it in the same room.
And Brad Miller and Frank Cassio, then coordinated with each other to be able to have this conference call tape recorded without Janet Arvizos' knowledge. Is that right?
I would just be assuming that. I don't know. I didn't ask that question.
All right. Now, did you ask Brad Miller if he had a conversation with Frank Cassio in advance of that call, as to what Frank Cassio should say to Janet?
No.
Did he offer to you the fact that there was a conversation between he and Mr. Cassio about what would be said to Janet Arvizo?
Not that I remember, no.
Did he tell you?
I just assumed it, because it was recorded.
Did he tell you in advance that they were going to set up that telephone call, he being Mr. Miller? Did Mr. Miller tell you in advance?
Mr. Miller didn't tell me about it until you seized, or, you, being the progression, seized it from the office, and that's when I asked. That would have been sometime after November of 2003.
Did Brad Miller write any reports to you about his surveillance or investigation of the Arvizo family?
Objection. Vague as to time. Relevance. Beyond the scope.
I didn't hear the ruling, I'm sorry.
It hasn't come yet.
Ah, maybe that's why.
The objection is overruled.
Yes.
Did he write those reports to you during the months of February and March of 2003?
No.
Did he write them after March of 2003?
Yes.
Objection. Relevance. Beyond the scope.
I'll leave the answer in. Next question.
When did you receive a report from Brad Miller that specifically dealt with that telephone conversation between Janet and Frank?
I don't think that I did.
Did he never write a report about that conversation?
I don't believe that he did.
Did you ask him to write a report about that conversation?
No.
Why not?
Why?
Did you think it was illegal?
At the time I felt, when I talked to him, that he articulated to me at least a reasonable expectation that a crime was going to be committed, so, no, I did not think this was illegal.
How many reports did Brad Miller write to you about his investigation of the Arvizo family prior to the end of April 2003?
I couldn't tell you.
Where are those reports today?
If they exist, I would have turned them over.
You don't have them in your possession anymore?
I don't believe so.
What do you mean by, if they exist? Is it possible you destroyed those reports?
No, I'm saying if he made them.
You don't.
I wouldn't have destroyed them. But if he had made a report, I would have turned them over.
You believe that during a 3-month investigation, he might not have written any reports at all?
No, the period of time for the investigation would have been sometime after February 7th through March, which would have, as I indicated before, been about 35 to 40 days. I believe that what he was doing would orally update me on what was happening.
At any time, Mr. Geragos, at any time up through the end of June of 2003, did Bradley Miller write any reports of his activities involving the Arvizo family?
Objection. Relevance.
And submit those reports to you?
Objection. Relevance. Foundation. Beyond the scope.
Overruled.
I couldn't tell you as I sit here. I know that I talked to him about it, and I don't know if he wrote up a formal report.
You don't have a clear recollection at this time of receiving any reports from Brad Miller prior to the conclusion of 2003?
Not as I sit here. If you've got one, you can show it to me.
Did you ever take possession of any of the surveillance tapes from from Brad Miller? Did he ever give you any of the surveillance tapes?
No. Are we talking the same tapes you were asking me about?
The surveillance tapes from the Arvizo family.
I was told those were seized through the search warrant, and I got those through discovery.
Did Brad Miller ever give you copies of those surveillance tapes?
No.
Did Brad Miller ever furnish you written reports of the surveillance activities that he was conducting?
Objection. Relevance. Foundation. Beyond the scope.
I think it's been asked and answered. I think he said he doesn't know.
Did Brad Miller ever send you emails that detailed his activities, specifically with regards to the surveillances?
He might have.
All right. Now, where are those emails?
If they, as I indicated last week, if I saved them, I probably would have saved them into the, at the risk of being mocked, into my WordPerfect file.
I promise I won't do that today.
Thank you.
Do you still have that in your office?
My WordPerfect file?
Yes.
Yes.
Did you check that file over the last week since you were here last Friday?
I checked on the date of the retainer after you had asked me.
Did you check to see if you still have notes in any capacity, either by way of email or handwritten notes or typed notes, from Brad Miller still in your file?
I didn't check on notes. I checked on, because you were asking me about whether it was late January or early February. I checked on when the retainer agreement was, and it looked to me to be February 4th. And that's the thing that I was focused on checking on.
Did you check in your WordPerfect, Series 11?
11.
File.
Yes.
On Mr. Jackson, the Jackson file, on whether or not there were emails from Brad Miller?
I did not.
Did you check, over this last week, did you check to see if there were emails from any of the people we've previously discussed, Mr. Schaffel, Mr. Weisner, Mr. Konitzer, Amen or Cassio?
No. Like you, I've been in trial for the last week.
All right, let's take a break.